Hey, it's James, Father's Rights and Resources, hashtag how I got custody. You know, judges will tell you, don't disrespect my ruling, don't disrespect my court, don't question my authority, or don't question my, decision making, or whatever. But the same courthouse will have different rulings for the same situation. Or, if we can't ever blaspheme or question a judge, how come there's a Court of Appeals and Supreme Court and United States Supreme Court? There's a Court of Appeals and Supreme Court in every state. And then there's the United States Supreme Court. Why are there appellate courts? In my own case, let's see, when was it? In March or April of 2001, pro tem family law commissioner, that's a low-level judge in King County in the greater Seattle area. Washington State has commissioners. Some of your states have referees or magistrates who weed out all the bullcrap family law rulings, and so the judges don't have to do their job and handle those. In Washington, we have commissioners, and within 10 days, anybody in Washington can appeal a decision from a commissioner to a judge. You can ask the commissioner to reconsider their decision, or you can ask a judge to revise the commissioner's ruling or look at it again de novo and do it over. De novo means basically a do-over, a fresh and anew. You basically get to have the same hearing all over again, because commissioners are not full-time judges and can't do things like trial and stuff like that. So commissioners are inferior or lower-ranking judicial officers. And then on top of that, Deborah Bianco, who's a lawyer in Bellevue, Washington, she was a pro tem commissioner. I call them pretend. A pro tem, pro, P-R-O, space, T-E-M. It's really short for tempore, T-E-M-P-O-R-E. Those are lawyers who are on call like a substitute teacher is in elementary school to come to the court when somebody calls in sick or is on vacation. So they're not even regularly doing this stuff. So they're like a half-assed judge. So Deborah Bianco says, you're doing a great job financially supporting your kid, because I presented a whole bunch of receipts showing my involvement and stuff like that, during the pregnancy and right after and stuff like that. And she's like, you're doing a great job financially. But, we have to appoint a guardian ad litem to investigate you first. And as you know, which I didn't know at the time, Troxel versus Granville said, and Troxel versus Granville, that was 2001. Troxel versus Granville was only 1 year old. And I should have said, you have to assume I act in the child's best interest, so give me the child. You don't get to assume that there might be something wrong, and you have to go and investigate me, and it was total bullcrap. Then I appealed from Commissioner Pro Tem Deborah Bianco. See, I just rattled off a bunch of titles. This is why I told you guys to read. And when you read, you should also look up stuff in the dictionary so you know some of the things that are in front of you. When you read a court document, like when I first read Commissioner Pro Tem or Judge Pro Tem, I was like, what does that mean? Let me go find out, instead of being in the dark and being a numbnuts dumbass who doesn't want to know what the hell I'm reading. Especially when it comes to a court order that governs your life with your kid, you should want to know what every word means. My gender's usually typically lazy and shiftless and doesn't give a shit about anything on their case except whatever their lawyer does, until they get screwed 8 months later after $50,000 wasting their time, energy, and money. I just talked to a guy, he had a post on Facebook, and I said, he said he hadn't seen his kid in years. I was like, have you ever tried to go to court, server at the last known address, and then do a default? He goes, yeah, $100,000 later and a couple of attorneys later. Yeah, I learned the hard way the attorneys aren't worth anything. I told him that I won in court and thousands of other dads have won without an attorney. You going to try again? Then he ignores me. Like, guys will have the answer right in front of their face, and they'll ignore that answer or not care. Like, oh my God, you won? How do I do that? They'd rather wallow in their misery and continue to be a loser. It's amazing to me. So anyway, my main point is the very same. So when I went from a commissioner to a judge, then on June, what was it? April. So it was in May. And I think April 15th was the hearing in front of Deborah Bianco. Then April 30th or May 1st was my hearing in front of Judge Suzanne Barnett, who has, now that she's retired, has all these national accolades because these judges sit around in these little clubs, just like the rich kids at school who were popular sitting together at lunch. It's the same phenomenon. They go to the same, wife swapping parties and cocaine parties, and then they worship each other and, circle jerk over each other, and they give each other all these awards in their little clubs. So then they could walk around and say, oh, I won this award, I won that award. Some people in Washington, D.C. gave Suzanne Barnett of Seattle some award, and they don't know, they'd never monitored her stuff. So anyway, she gave me 5 days a week visitation, but she said, you can have 4 hours a day, and the daycare can have 4 hours a day. And I asked her, I said, my constitutional rights are being violated. I was starting to realize the constitutional case law, like the Nebraska case and some other ones that are mentioned in Troxel. And she said, what constitutional right? And I should have said, how are you overseeing a family court case and you don't know my constitutional rights? Don't you know Troxel versus Granville? And I actually rattled off and read a couple of cases. I had the case law sitting in front of me. I said, I mentioned in my paperwork, but she said, you can't handle the child all day. You'll be too tired. The mother is going to work for 8 hours, then has the child for 16 hours. This lady is saying, I can't handle the child if I go to work 8 hours and have her 8 hours and have 8 hours of rest and relaxation. Now that was messed up. I should have done a reconsideration on that, but I was happy just to get anything that I didn't know any better. So I had 5 days a week, and I actually was glad I had short frequency rather than like every other weekend with a long gap of 2 weeks in between. I saw my daughter 5 days a week, so that repeated thing helped solidify the bond that she already had in the womb, because I used to sing a song to her in the womb because I knew about that attachment. You dads, if you got a baby's mom who's pregnant and you're still working with each other or whatever, you should have like one little catchphrase, or if you know the name, like let's say the name is Brianna or something, and you do some little jingle like Daddy loves Brianna or something like that, and say that over and over. I had a little song for my daughter, and then I sang it to her in the nursery at the hospital when she was born, and her face lit up. She couldn't open her eyes for like a week, but her eyelids were starting. It was like she was trying, like I saw her perk up. It was the most amazing thing. Like I knew she would have a bond, but when you see it in real life, it's crazy. But my main point is, same courthouse. I went from 0 visitation as if I'm a criminal to 5 days a week. How does that happen? Because in different courtrooms, you have different people interpreting stuff the way that they want to. Why do you have court of appeals? You should keep that in mind next time a judge chews you out. Like, don't question my authority. Don't do this and don't do that. And say, why do you have a problem with that? You're supposed to be thicker skinned than that. You're supposed to not take this stuff personally. Plus, there's court of appeals who question your rulings and question judges' rulings. And there's actually judges who get suspended or reprimanded by the Commission on Judicial Conduct or whoever's in charge of ethical complaints against judges. So how dare you tell me I can't question a judge, especially when we have a history in this country of things like Plessy versus Ferguson, which is the case that was overruled by Brown versus Board of Education. Plessy versus Ferguson said black people can have separate train cabooses, separate living quarters, separate this and that, separate but equal is equal. As long as it's equal, it's equal. So there was segregation. There was Jim Crow laws, and those were allowed because of Plessy versus Ferguson. And it took 60 or 70 years until the 1950s that Brown versus Board of Education came along. So Brown versus Board of Education, basically, U.S. Supreme Court basically says our U.S. Supreme Court was racist. You know, this country did the Tuskegee experiment. Our government did experiments on people with psychedelic drugs and did, oh my gosh, what is it called? People call other people conspiracy theorists nut jobs when they talk of MK Ultra. And then we put Japanese into concentration camps. We gave Native Americans the crappiest piece of land. So our judicial system and justice system and government has a horrific track record. So to say that you're questioning a judge or telling a judge what to say, how dare you tell me what to say? This is my courtroom. You're a public servant. I have a right to tell you what to say, and you go back and contemplate and decide. Plus, there's different rulings among different judges for this with the same facts. And then there's the Court of Appeals. It's just something to think about and throw out there, especially on reconsideration if you want to shove it back in their face.